Far Cry is an open-world action-adventure series developed and published by Ubisoft. There have been 5 titles in the series so far, and with a few smaller entries in between main games. Ubisoft announced Far Cry 6, and recently they have shown some gameplay in a new stream. Far Cry 3 is my favorite open-world game of all time. I have played much better open-world games, like Skyrim, GTA, Fallout, Red Dead, and much more. But for some reason, I always come back to Far Cry 3 for a new playthrough. As you can imagine, I am really excited for Far Cry 6. Not only because it's more Far Cry, but it's also returning to what made Far Cry 3 so fun for me. So let's go over what I want from Far Cry 6. Far Cry games have recently had some of the best villains in gaming. Vaas from Far Cry 3 is easily one of the best villains of all time. He has his classic,
"Did I ever tell you the definition of insanity?"
line. His character was performed to perfection by Mando. In Far Cry 3, you came for the awesome gameplay and stayed for Vaas. The rest of the games had great villains as well. Far Cry 4 had Pagan Min, who is voiced by Troy Baker. Far Cry 5 had Joseph Seed, who is voiced by Greg Brick. Luckily, we might have the best villain yet, Anton Castillo, who is modeled after and played by the famous actor Giancarlo Esposito. Known for his roles in Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul as Gus, and Moff Gideon in The Mandalorian, the best thing about him is that he plays an amazing villain. But all the Far Cry villains have at least one thing in common, and that is their insanity. They seem to be absolutely crazy, and that's what makes them so memorable. If we can get that from Anton Castillo, then we may very well have the best Far Cry villain to date. The Far Cry games haven't been known to really have the best protagonists, but they've been alright. We don't really get much storytelling or character arcs in Far Cry protagonists. The best we've gotten so far was Jason Brody in Far Cry 3. His character arc was a view of the island you were trapped on from a new perspective. When you play the game, you begin to wonder how all of these villains got to be so crazy. But as you progress through the story, you slowly start to realize that Jason is going insane as well. That's when you realize that the island is what makes you go crazy, and he needs to break the cycle before it's too late. Hence this foreshadowing in Vaas's
insanity
quote. In the recent trailer, we seem to be getting much more character in our new protagonist, Danny Rojas. You'll get to choose between male and female versions of them. One thing that does concern me though is Ubisoft's track record with this sort of thing. Assassin's Creed Odyssey was the first game where Ubisoft tried to give players this choice. You could either play as Cassandra or Alexios. Unfortunately, Cassandra ended up being a much more interesting character than Alexios. He felt shoehorned in to give the players the illusion of choice. The same thing happened in Assassin's Creed Valhalla, in which male Ivor was much more fleshed out than female Ivor. Though it could be too early to tell, the same thing seems to be happening in Far Cry 6. Ubisoft seems to be pushing female Danny a lot more than male one. This could be a reason to suspect that she will be far more interesting than male Danny. I don't understand why they always try and do this. Just have one gender and focus on them. We don't need male Danny. This can run the risk of dividing the fanbase as one half will have a better experience than the other. If you're picking up Far Cry 6 before you select your character, just wait and maybe see what the reviewers who got the game early say is the better option to choose. Hopefully this won't be the case and both Dannys are interesting. Stealth in Far Cry games isn't as great as it could be. You would think that with some of Ubisoft's experience with other titles, namely Assassin's Creed, they could have figured it out. It could use some improvements as it's the most efficient way to clear a base of bad guys or complete a mission. Well, most of the time. Stealth in Far Cry games can be a very dull and basic at times. You have a crouch button that makes your steps inaudible and enemies don't see you as easily. You have to get behind or above them to do a takedown. There's a meter that fills up the longer you're in enemy's line of sight. You can throw a rock to distract them.
Hey.
I'm not saying it has to be super detailed Hitman levels of stealth, but they could make it a little bit more enjoyable, and it would make Far Cry 6 a lot better of an experience overall. They could possibly make silenced weapons more powerful, or maybe give the players some more choices to approach a situation. This isn't a huge deal for me personally, but I would like to see some changes in stealth to make Far Cry 6 a much better game. Far Cry open worlds usually don't have a whole ton to occupy them. That is because they want to give you a lot of freedom to travel and do what you want to. Each location isn't too far away from each other, but enough to make it feel like a trek across the map. You usually run into complications like trying to find a vehicle, running into wildlife and pirates, making sure you're going the right way. All this was fun because you knew what you were doing and you were going to come out victorious each time, but you were given the freedom to have a ton of fun with each encounter. It was your playground, your rules. Far Cry 6 seems to be taking a much more realistic approach to open world. If you hide your weapons, then enemies don't suspect anything. You can persuade them to and blend in. Far Cry 3, the enemies just shot you no matter what. Mainly because you stood up from the rest of the inhabitants, but it was still fun. This looks cool because it makes getting from place to place a hard task. You could forget to hide your weapons and you have to fight enemies, or you could hide your weapons and have to work hard to not draw suspicion. I hope that Ubisoft isn't scared of keeping the navigation hard either. In Far Cry 3, you only had a mini-map and a general direction of where to go. You had to learn the routes of the map, because if you took the wrong turn, you might run into some unwanted company. I hope they keep it the same as Far Cry 3, and I hope they don't do it like in Far Cry 5, where they did what every other open world game does and give you a compass. Since a Far Cry game is kind of your playground, I think that they should increase the amount of crazy stuff you could do. They seem to be doing just that with Far Cry 6. Ubisoft is adding some new awesome vehicle customization, some new weapons, and
some very unique, deadly weapons.
they're also adding new pets. All we've seen so far is an alligator, a dog, and a horse, but there's sure to be more. They seem more gimmicky as they might just be more annoying than useful. Pets aren't as easy to pull off in games, but if Ubisoft is able to do it, then props to them. It just doesn't seem like something I'd use, though the alligator does look pretty cool. Another thing that I would like to see return is the map editor, with much more improved features and some advanced ones for people who like to get into the real nitty-gritty. This could really give much more longevity to Far Cry 6 and satisfy fans alike. Well, that's about all from me. I really hope that Far Cry 6 is great and a true successor to 3, 4, and 5. Of course, this isn't everything I would like to see, but these are just some of the items on my checklist. I'll try to review Far Cry 6 when it comes out on October 9th, but it might take a little while since Far Cry games are usually pretty big. I might make a more in-depth video focusing on Far Cry 3 when we get closer to the launch of Far Cry 6, but no promises there. If you haven't played Far Cry 3, I do recommend it. You can get the Classic Edition, which is basically just a remaster on Xbox, PlayStation, and PC. I do recommend the other games such as 4 and 5, but Far Cry 3 is the one I recommend the most. I figured I would do another What I Want From video, since you guys seem to enjoy the first one I did on Escape 4. Link in the description, by the way. Seriously, it's my most viewed video, about 150. Thank you guys for the support, and I'll see you in the next one.